I never imagined the day would come when silence would become my shield. When my husband passed away, people thought the greatest thing I inherited was grief. And perhaps that would have been easier to carry. Grief at least is expected. People look at you with sympathy in their eyes. They whisper condolences at the supermarket. They bring casseroles and send flowers that wilt in a week. Grief fades slowly, like old wallpaper peeling from the walls. But what no one saw, what not even my son suspected, was that hidden inside my grief was a secret far greater, far heavier, and far more dangerous than loss alone, because my husband, in his quiet and methodical way, had prepared something for me. Something he had never spoken about in detail, not even in his last days. I thought he was leaving me with love, with memories, perhaps a little money to survive. I went up. Papers came when the lawyer sat me down in his office. The truth was like a wave crashing over me. 12 rental homes, a shopping plaza, and something else that I will not reveal to you just yet, because you must walk with me through this journey to understand the weight of that. Final revelation. Do you know what it feels like to sit across from your son, his face tight with calculation, while you hold this truth inside your chest like a burning coal? He thought he knew everything. He thought he understood who his father was, what his father owned, what his father would leave behind. But my husband had trusted me with more than a widow's pension, more than a sentimental heirloom. He had trusted me with power, and I, in turn, chose to bury it under silence. It's strange, isn't it? The world thinks of silence as emptiness. They think if you are quiet, you are powerless, invisible, forgotten. But silence can be armor. Silence can be strategy. My son would look around my modest living room, his eyes scanning the worn furniture, the faded curtains, the stack of bills I left deliberately in plain sight. He thought I was weak. He thought I was surviving on scraps. And in that miscalculation, he revealed himself to me, 'cause every sigh, every impatient remark, every question disguised as concern, "Mom, do you have enough to get by?" was less about love and more about what he was hoping to gain. And I knew deep down that if he discovered the truth too soon, he would not honor it. Cora, he would consume it. Cora, he would devour the very legacy his father had built, brick by brick, home by home, tenant by tenant. So I bit my tongue, folded the documents, flid the keys. And at night, when the house was quiet and my tears for my husband refused to stop, I would take out that heavy keychain and hold it in my hands, the cold metal pressing against my palm, whispering to myself, "Not yet. Not now." But secrets are living things. They press against your ribs. They throb in the back of your mind. They poison the spaces where honesty should live. Every conversation with my son became a chess match. He was sharper than I wanted him to be, more curious, more demanding. Sometimes, when he visited, he lingered too long by the desk drawer or by the filing cabinet. Sometimes I caught him opening doors he had no reason to open, rifling through stacks of old envelopes. He would smile when he caught me watching, but it was not the smile of a son. It was the smile of someone who believed he was getting closer to the truth. And maybe that's why you need to hear this entire story. Because what happened next was not the story of a widow trying to survive, was the story of a mother forced to defend what was left to her against the very person who should have protected her. Have you ever wondered what you would do if the person you trusted most began to look at you with eyes full of suspicion instead of love? Would you confess everything, handing over the keys and the deeds, praying that your child would show restraint? Or would you do what I did choose? Silence as a weapon, as a test, as a wall between what you hold and the hands reaching out to. Take it. Stay with me because you need to hear how it unfolded. You need to know how my silence became both the shield and the trap. And when the night finally came, when my son sat across from me, his voice rising, his hands clenching the arms of the chair, demanding to know exactly what his father left behind, that was the night when silence cracked. I will tell you what I said and what I didn't say. I will tell you the choice I made. And you will see why I am speaking these words now, to you, and not to him. Because sometimes the dead leave us with more than memories. Sometimes they leave us with wars we never asked to fight. And before I go on, before you hear the rest, don't just listen. Ask yourself, what would you have done if the legacy of your family was placed in your hands, but the person sitting across from you was already planning how to take it away? Asterisk, the first time my son raised his voice at me, I almost didn't recognize him. It wasn't just the words it was the way he leaned forward in his chair, the way his eyes narrowed, the way his tone carried, not worry, but entitlement. Mom, he said, his jaw tight, I need to know exactly what Dad left you. All of it. Stop acting like you don't understand. My fingers trembled as I folded the same napkin over and over on my lap. I looked at him across the table, trying to see the little boy I once tucked into bed, the boy who used to beg for one more story, one more hug. But that boy was gone. What sat across from me now was a man whose patience had worn thin, a man who believed he was owed an answer, and who was ready to strip me of my silence if I didn't give it due. You know what it feels like when your own child treats you like a stranger holding a secret instead of a mother holding a memory? It cuts deeper than any betrayal. He didn't ask me how I was sleeping, how the nights felt without his father's warmth beside me. He didn't ask if I had eaten or if the house felt too empty. No, his questions were sharp, targeted, financial. Do you still have the life insurance papers? Did Dad have accounts you're not telling me about? What about properties? Come on, Mom. You don't expect me to believe he left you with nothing? And in that moment, I realized something chilling. My son wasn't guessing. He knew. Somewhere, somehow, he had caught a glimpse of the truth. Maybe it was a careless word from the lawyer. Maybe it was the way my hands shook when I locked the desk drawer. Maybe it was the keychain he saw me holding late one night when I thought he was gone. But whatever it was, my silence was no longer a curtain. It was a red flag, and he was pulling at it with all his strength. I tried to deflect. I told him grief had clouded my memory, that I hadn't sorted through the paperwork yet. I told him I was tired, that I wanted to remember his father for the man he was, not for the assets he left. But he laughed a short, cold laugh that echoed through the room. You can't fool me, Mom. Dad was smart. He didn't leave you with scraps. I know he left you something. The question is, why are you hiding it from me? Why? Indeed. I wanted to scream at him because I don't trust you. Because I've seen the hunger in your eyes, the greed in your words. The way you measure me as if I'm nothing more than the gatekeeper of your inheritance. A tie. I kept my lips pressed tight, because the moment you give away a secret, you can never take it back. He stood then, pacing the living room like a restless predator. His hand brushed over the framed photos, pausing at one of his father's shaking hands with a tenant outside one of the very homes my son didn't yet know existed. His jaw clenched. He turned back to me and said, If you don't tell me, I'll find out myself. That was the moment my blood ran cold, 'cause I knew he meant it. I knew he would start opening drawers, tearing through closets, calling lawyers, maybe even showing up at properties he had no right to. The walls of my carefully built silence were beginning to crumble. I tried to steady my voice. Not everything your father left behind was meant for you, I whispered. Some things. Some things were meant to stay where they are. He froze, eyes narrowing, lips curling into something that looked far too much like victory. So you admit it, he said quietly. You admit there's more? My heart pounded in my chest, but I didn't answer. Sometimes silence is more dangerous than words. And in that silence, I realized I was no longer just keeping a secret. I was defending it. That night, after he stormed out, slamming the door behind him, I sat alone in the dark. The shadows of the room stretched long across the walls, and the keys weighed heavy in my pocket. Each one was a promise. Each one was a test My son was circling closer and closer, and I had to decide, would I keep hiding the truth, risking his wrath? Or would I reveal it and risk losing everything his father built? Stay with me, because what came next was the beginning of a battle I never thought I'd have to fight, not against strangers, not against the world, but against my own flesh and blood. And if you've ever felt cornered in your own home by someone you once trusted with your life, then you know the terror I felt that night. After that night, nothing was the same. My son stopped visiting with warmth. He no longer came by with groceries or asked how I was feeling. Instead, his visits became inspections. Every knock at the door was followed by eyes that scanned the room like a hawk, searching for cracks in my silence. I could feel it in the air, the shift from son to interrogator. He wasn't coming to see me anymore. He was coming to hunt, and hunt he did. The first time, he excused himself to use the bathroom. He was gone for 20 minutes. I could hear drawers opening and shutting upstairs, the sound of hangers scraping across the closet rod. My heart pounded with every creak of the floorboards. When he came back down, he pretended nothing had happened. But there was a new glint in his eye. A sharpness that told me he'd seen something, or at least suspected enough to keep digging. I had to move the papers again. That night, when the house was finally quiet, I gathered everything from the drawer where I had once thought they were safe. Deeds, contracts, letters, documents that proved exactly what my husband had left behind. My hands shook as I placed them into a box and tucked it deep inside the attic, covering it with old blankets that smelled of dust and mothballs. I whispered a prayer into the silence. Please, let this be enough. Let him stop looking. But greed doesn't stop. It grows within. A week, my son came again. This time, he didn't even bother to hide his intentions. He walked through the house like he owned it, opening cabinets, peering into the pantry, even lifting rugs as if he expected to find something buried beneath. Mom, he said at one point, his voice low, you're not being honest with me. I can feel it. Dad wouldn't have left you with nothing. And if you think you can keep it all to yourself, you're wrong. The words sliced through me, not because of what he said, but because of how he said it. Cold, detached, like a stranger. My own son standing in the living room where he'd once played with toy cars, now accusing me of betrayal. He almost found it that day. I'll never forget the moment. He climbed up the old wooden stairs to the attic, his footsteps heavy, his breath audible in the quiet of the house. I followed, behind, trying to steady my voice. It's nothing up there but junk, I said. But he ignored me. The attic door creaked open, and for a terrifying moment, I thought it was over. He walked inside, kicking aside boxes of Christmas decorations, lifting lids from old trunks. His hands were inches from the blankets where I had hidden the truth. I felt sweat dripping down my back. Every second was a lifetime. Then, dashed by some miracle, his phone rang. He cursed under his breath, answered it, and after a few short words, stormed down the stairs without another glance. I stood frozen in the attic, staring at the pile that had almost betrayed me, my chest heaving. I dropped to my knees beside the box, clutching it as though I could press it into the floorboards themselves. That night, I realized my silence had reached its limit. He would not stop. He would keep searching, keep prying, keep demanding. The walls of the house could no longer contain the secret. And the longer I waited, the more dangerous it became. But still, I could not bring myself to tell him, because telling him would mean surrendering everything his father trusted me to protect. Do you see the impossible position I was in? If I revealed the truth, I lost control. If I hid it, I risked war with my own blood. There was no peace. Left only a choice between two kinds of betrayal: betraying my husband's trust, or betraying my son's expectation. And then came the night when he stopped pretending altogether. The night he slammed his hand on the table and said, "If you don't tell me, I'll find out anyway. I'll go to the courthouse. I'll speak to Dad's lawyer myself. I'll uncover every single thing you're hiding." And in that moment, I knew this secret was no longer safe. The storm was coming. And once it hit, Nothing in our family would ever be the same again. Asterisk after that night. The war no longer lived only within the walls of my house. My son stopped circling like a hawk indoors and instead spread his wings outside. And that was when I realized something even more terrifying. Silence is easy to defend in your own home. But once suspicion leaves the front door, it multiplies, grows legs. It finds ears that should never hear. He started small, I noticed. It in the way neighbors began asking questions that didn't belong to them. Mrs. Alvarez, the woman who had rented one of my husband's houses for years, suddenly asked me at the market, "Will your son be our new landlord now that your husband's gone?" Her voice was casual, but her eyes weren't. She had no reason to ask that unless someone had spoken to her first. My heart dropped. My son had been visiting tenants. He was digging in places I prayed he'd never touch. And he didn't stop there. Within days, I received a call from my husband's old lawyer. His tone was polite but measured. "Your son came by," he said, pausing as if the words carried too much weight. "He asked about the estate. He asked about the properties." I pressed the phone tighter to my ear, my heart hammering. "What did you tell him?" I asked. The lawyer hesitated. I reminded him that the estate was in order and that his father's wishes were clear, but he's persistent. He'll be back. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the shadows moving like restless spirits, wondering how much time I had left before my son forced the truth into the light. I thought about my husband, how carefully he had built every brick of those rental homes. How proud he had been of the shopping plaza. How he used to say, "One day, this will protect you when I'm gone." And I thought about how quickly it could all be torn apart if placed into the wrong hands. The wrong hands? My son's hands. Do you understand how that feels? To love someone with every piece of your soul, and yet look at them with fear because you know what greed can do. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my son's face, once innocent, now hardened, calculating, already planning what he would do with what was not his dot. Days later, I found proof that he had gone even further. I discovered receipts tucked carelessly in his jacket pocket when he left it hanging on my chair. Receipts from the courthouse. Receipts from the records office. He was filing requests, pulling deeds, asking questions about titles and transfers. Piece by piece, he was building the puzzle I had kept hidden. I remember clutching those receipts in my hand, the paper crumpling as my chest tightened. My legs felt weak beneath me. He wasn't just guessing anymore. He was uncovering. And once he had the full picture, there would be no turning back. That evening, when he returned, he didn't come empty-handed. He placed a stack of printed papers on the table, his eyes gleaming with something between triumph and accusation. "You see, Mom? You can't hide forever. I've already found 2 of the rental homes. Tenants confirmed they pay you every month. You lied to me." The words stung not because of their truth, but because of their venom. You lied to me. He didn't see my silence as protection. He saw it as betrayal. I opened my mouth to defend myself, but nothing came out. What could I say? That I was protecting him from himself. That his father had entrusted me, not him, for a reason. The truth burned in my throat, but my lips stayed sealed. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "If you don't tell me the rest, I'll find it anyway. I'll talk to every tenant, every lawyer, every clerk in this town until I uncover all of it. And when I do, don't expect me to forgive you." And then he left, just like that. No hug, no goodbye. Just the echo of the door closing behind him, leaving me in a silence so heavy it felt like the house itself was sinking. That night, sat alone at the kitchen table, the keys spread out in front of me, glinting in the dim light. 12 rental homes, a shopping plaza. And the one secret I had not yet spoken aloud, the one piece of this puzzle he still hadn't touched. If he found that, everything would be lost. And so I realized I could no longer wait. My silence was no longer protection. It had become a ticking clock. And when that clock struck, My son would not only know the truth, he would take it. Unless I made a move first. That night, as the keys glimmered in front of me on the kitchen table, I understood something I had been trying to deny. I was no longer just keeping a secret. I was fighting a war. And wars aren't won by silence alone. They require strategy, timing, and courage. My husband had trusted me with these properties, with this legacy, because he knew I had the strength to protect it. But strength doesn't always look like shouting. Sometimes strength looks like a whisper in the dark. A careful step when no one is watching. A plan born in the stillness of midnight. I gathered the deeds and contracts, every scrap of paper that tied me to the truth, and spread them out on the table. My hands hovered over them, trembling. 12 rental homes, T shopping plaza, and something more, the piece my son had not yet discovered. That final secret was like a flame flickering at the edge of a storm. If he reached it, if he understood its value, there would be no stopping him. So I made a decision. If he was willing to search, to pry, to tear apart every corner of my life, then I had to move faster. I had to take the battlefield away from him. The next morning, before the sun had risen, I dressed quietly and slipped out of the house. The air was cold and the streets were empty. For the first time since my husband's death, I felt like I was moving with purpose, not as a grieving widow, but as a guardian. I went straight to the bank, carrying a folder so thick with documents it felt like a stone in my arms. The clerk greeted me with a polite smile, but when she saw the seriousness in my eyes, her smile faded. I need to place these under safekeeping, I told her. They cannot remain in my home any longer. She nodded, leading me into a private office, where I signed forms and sealed the documents into a secure box that only I could access. When the heavy vault door shut, echoing like thunder in the quiet room, I finally breathed again. For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of control. But the keys were different. Keys could not be hidden in paper. They were solid, physical, dangerous in the wrong hands. And as I held them in my palm, I realized I needed another layer of protection. That afternoon, I drove across town to visit one of the few people I still trusted, an old friend of my husband's, a man who had managed one of the rental homes. For years, he was loyal, quiet, and above all, discreet. I placed half of the keys in his hands, my voice barely above a whisper. "Keep these for me. Don't ask why. Don't tell anyone. I'll just keep them safe." He looked at me with concern, but he didn't press. He nodded once, and that was enough. By the time I returned home, the house felt different. Empty, yet safer, as though I had shifted the weight of the secret just enough to keep it from collapsing on me. But peace never lasts long when suspicion is hunting you. That evening, my son appeared again, his eyes sharper than before, his words more pointed. He tossed another folder of papers onto the table, new discoveries from the courthouse. He had uncovered more homes, tracked down tenants, pieced together fragments of the empire I was trying to guard. "You're running out of places to hide." "Mom," he said, his voice calm, almost smug. "Soon, I'll know everything. Why don't you just make this easier and tell me now?" I looked at him, and for the first time I didn't feel fear. I felt something else rising inside me, resolve. "Not everything your father left was meant for you," I said slowly, the words deliberate, each one a stone laid between us. His expression shifted on jaw, disbelief, maybe even insult. But I didn't flinch. Because for the first time since this began, I wasn't only defending, I was striking back. With my silence, with my choices, with every move he couldn't see, and as he stormed out, vowing once again that he would find the truth, I felt it, the shift in the battle. He thought he was closing in, but in reality, I was already moving further beyond his reach. Still, there was one thing I couldn't ignore. He had grown too close. Search was too thorough. If I wanted to protect the last piece of the secret, the one treasure he hadn't yet uncovered, would have to do more than hide. I would have to outthink him, outsmart him, outserve him, because the storm was no longer on the horizon. Was here. And the next time he came back through that door, it wouldn't be with questions. It would be with demands. Asterisk, the storm arrived sooner than I expected. I had convinced myself that by moving the documents, by splitting the keys, I had bought time. But greed is faster than fear. And my son was no longer simply circling around me, was recruiting others to tighten the net. It began with a knock. At the door. Not his. To men in suits. Strangers. They introduced themselves as advisors, claiming they were there on my behalf, offering to help me sort through the estate. But their words were rehearsed, their smiles rehearsed, their eyes sharp. Behind them, in the distance, I saw my son's car parked at the corner. He hadn't even bothered to hide. He was watching, testing, sending them as scouts into the battlefield of my living room. I let the men speak, let them shuffle their papers, let them attempt to intimidate me with legal jargon. But my silence was stronger than their words. I smiled, politely thanked them for their concern, and closed the door. Behind the glass, I saw my son's jaw tighten. His fist slam against the steering wheel before he sped off. That night, I sat in the dark again, only the tick of the clock filling the silence. My son was escalating. It wasn't just prying. He was mobilizing. When people begin involving outsiders, secrets don't stay secrets for long. The very next day, I received a letter, an official-looking envelope stamped with the seal of the courthouse. Inside, I found a request for disclosure documents regarding my husband's estate. My son had filed it. He wasn't just asking questions anymore. Kay was demanding answers. By law, my hand shook as I held the paper, the black ink blurring through my tears. He had turned me into an opponent, into a barrier he needed to crush. It's my son, my own flesh and blood. I wanted to tear the letter to shreds. I wanted to burn it, scatter the ashes, pretend it never existed. But instead, I folded it neatly and placed it into a drawer, because anger is loud, but strategy is quiet. And I was learning that if I wanted to survive this war, I could not react like a mother. I had to think like a guardian, but the pressure didn't stop there. Days later, I caught whispers from neighbors' rumors that my son had been speaking to them directly. He told one that I was forgetful, that I was struggling to manage on my own, planting seeds of doubt about my sanity. Another neighbor hinted that he had been asking whether I was paying bills on time, whether I had fallen behind. He was building a case not just in the courthouse, but in the court of public opinion. That was when I understood he wasn't just trying to take the inheritance. He was trying to discredit me, to paint me as incapable, unstable, unworthy of the very trust my husband had placed in me. And then came the moment that broke me in ways I cannot fully explain. He brought someone with him, not strangers in suits. This time, not advisors. He brought a lawyer. And together they sat in my living room across from me, papers spread out between us like weapons. My son didn't even speak at first. He let the lawyer do it for him. Questions disguised as demands, concerns disguised as accusations. And finally, the words I feared most. Mrs., it would be in everyone's best interest if you were transparent about the full scope of your husband's assets. If you refuse, the court will compel you. I looked at my son then. Not at the lawyer, not at the papers. At him, his eyes didn't waver. He had chosen his side. It was not mine. Do you know what it feels like when the child you gave life to looks at you not as a mother, but as an obstacle? It is worse than betrayal. It is a wound that never stops bleeding. But in that moment, as my world seemed to collapse, something inside me shifted again. The grief that had once weakened me hardened into steel. The fear that had once silenced me sharpened into resolve. And I knew I could not wait for the court, for the neighbors, for whispers and rumors to decide my fate. If I wanted to protect the last piece of my husband's legacy, I had to act now. I had to strike before he took everything. So I smiled, yes? I smiled at the lawyer, at my son, at the battlefield they thought they had won. And I said, if you believe you're ready to hear everything, then come back tomorrow. Alone, the lawyer looked confused. My son's eyes narrowed, but I didn't flinch. I gave nothing away. And when they left, I locked the door, leaned against it, and let my body tremble with the weight of what I had just set in motion, because tomorrow would change everything. Tomorrow, the silence would end, but not in the way my son expected.